Think about the last time you heard a piece of news. Maybe it was when Justice Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed to the Supreme Court earlier this week. How did you hear about it? Well, chances are you heard about it on your phone, most likely on social media. And if that's the case, then you're certainly not alone. According to Pew Research, 3 out of every 5 Americans get at least some of their news from social media. The thing is, today in the United States, we live in an information age. Information and news has never been more accessible to Americans because it's right at our fingertips with the advent of social media and the iPhone. But along with this abundance and ease of access to information comes a very dangerous risk, which is that with more information comes the greater possibility of more misinformation spreading online. And that's what I've come to talk to you all today about, is the phenomenon that we have come to know as fake news. Now, today in this speech, we're going to be discovering how to avoid misinformation online by first understanding how fake news spreads on social media. Secondly, looking at some of the common characteristics that misinformation articles have online. And then finally, looking at how we can actually be responsible and help stop the spread of misinformation on the internet. So first, in order to really understand the problem, it's important to really know what we're dealing with and understand the spread. And a good way to start is by defining what we mean by fake news. Fortunately, we have a good definition given to us by researchers at Indiana University at Bloomington, where they say that fake news is basically any blatant misinformation online, whether it be hoaxes, conspiracy theories, flat out fabricated news reports, or even satire. And what all of these things have in common is that they're designed to mislead. They're designed to not tell you the truth about a situation or the truth about the news, but rather to get you to believe something other than reality. Even if it's intended to be a joke, it still has consequences. Now you might be wondering, well, how can this really be that damaging? I mean, after all, I like to read The Onion. But what we often see from fake news is that it spreads rapidly online. Now, Business Insider gives us a little bit of insight into that. They actually tracked the top 100 fake news stories on Facebook in 2019. And what they found was that those 100 news stories were shared over 150 million times on Facebook last year alone. What Business Insider found was that it doesn't take much for one story to just go viral. And it's incredibly damaging if those stories are fake, as these 100 stories were. And so that makes it really important to understand how can we actually identify fake news so that we don't end up spreading it online. And that leads me to what some of the common characteristics of fake news are. And there are a couple. The first one is told to us by a paper that was published by the Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence. And they basically say that fake news articles often have really long titles, as you see with these clips of fake news articles from Facebook that I've inserted into this speech. What we see oftentimes with fake news articles is that they're designed for you to get really all of the information in the title of the speech. For example, Pelosi diverts $2.4 billion from Social Security to cover impeachment costs. Now, if you were to actually click on that article, what you would find is no real substance. You wouldn't see an interview, you wouldn't see any data, you would simply see a few words and it's really scattered and not substantial at all. And the reason is that it was never intended for you to actually click on it and read it. Fake news articles are designed for you to simply read the title, for you to be taken aback and say, oh, well, that's crazy, and then go ahead and share it online. They're articles that are designed not to inform, but rather simply to get more views and shares. And that's what makes them so incredibly dangerous and helps them to spread like wildfire. But the second thing that helps them to spread like wildfire is the fact that they're often very inflammatory in nature. And this comes from those same researchers at Indiana University who say that fake news is often sponsored by people that have very much political motives to post the things that they do. For example, this article in the bottom left corner about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez proposing a nationwide motorcycle ban. Of course, she would never do that. But what this article did is it highlighted a very polarizing figure in American politics and inserted a story that half of the American people would very much like to believe. Even if no one actually thinks that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would propose a nationwide motorcycle ban, what the article does is it allows people to be taken aback. It's inflammatory. And people say, well, even if she isn't actually doing it, I believe this is the type of person that she is. And so they go ahead and share the article anyway. And so it ends up being just as damaging. But once we really understand the spread, and once we really understand what some of the common characteristics are of fake news on the internet, it makes it imperative for us to be able to have a practical takeaway. How can we actually be responsible online? And there's a couple of things we can do. The first thing we can do is to understand the nature of the beast that we're working with. And the nature of the problem that we're dealing with is that fake news spreads much faster than regular news, according to the Georgetown Law Technology Review. What they say is that even after fake news has been fact-checked by independent sources such as PolitiFact, it often spreads faster than regular news because it resonates with the readers. What you probably noticed with those articles that I showed on the last slide is that they're all things that certain portions of the country would probably love to believe, because they're all very inflammatory, they're very divisive, and they're the types of things you see people share on Facebook all the time. But what we often see is that the people who share them and retweet them don't actually care that they've been fact-checked. And so the fact that an independent source has come and said, well, this isn't true, isn't actually doing any good. And that's why it's so critical that we fact-check information before we share it. There are actual resources that are available, companies like PolitiFact, who do the work of checking these articles to verify them and make sure that they're accurate. And if they're not, they go ahead and tell you. But fact checkers are only as good as the people who listen to the fact checkers. And that's why it's imperative that we all recognize that we're responsible for the information that we spread. Contrary to popular trends on Twitter, we are in fact responsible for retweets and information that we share, even if we didn't create it. And so it's very important that we check and make sure we're getting our news from reputable sources. And then if it's a source that we might question, we make sure we verify the information before we share it. In this speech, we looked at the epidemic of fake news in the United States, and we took away a few key takeaways. The first is we looked at how it spreads so rapidly online. Secondly, we looked at some common characteristics of fake news. And then finally, we saw how we can all individually be responsible online. See, we make decisions every day based on information. Whether it's updates about the upcoming 2020 election next week or COVID-19 news updates, our world relies on the assumption that the information that we read is credible and information that we can trust. So don't believe everything you read on the internet. Tell your friends to make sure that they fact check information before we share it. And hopefully at the end of this speech, we now all have the tools to be able to do that. Thank y'all so much.